In the sixth episode of Manhunt, John Wilkes Booth and his accomplice are surrounded by Union soldiers, and Booth faces his ultimate fate, but as it turns out, the television series took creative liberties when it came to what happened to Booth after his death. In real life, and in episode 6 of Manhunt, Booth and Harold are cornered in a barn owned by the Garrett family. Though Harold surrenders, Booth refuses to come out, even as the barn burns. Eventually, Union Solider Boston Corbett takes matters into his own hands and shoots Booth, killing him. For the most part, Manhunt gets Booth's capture and death historically correct. Booth and Harold were held up in a barn, and the soldiers set the building on fire to try and get Booth to escape. David Harold surrendered, but Booth was harder to capture. And finally, Boston Corbett saw an opportunity to take Booth down, so he shot the assassin through a gap in the barn, giving him a wound that was strangely similar to that of Abraham Lincoln's. However, what happened to Booth's body after this shootout differs between real life and what Manhunt portrays. The real body of John Wilkes Booth was eventually returned to his family. Booth died on April 26, 1865. In real life, John Wilkes Booth was killed by Boston Corbett on April 26, 1865. Long afterward, his remains were returned to his family. On that day, Corbett shot Booth in the back of the neck, giving him a wound so similar to Abraham Lincoln's that many felt it was karmic justice. However, unlike Lincoln, Booth remained conscious for 3 hours after sustaining the injury, leaving him to suffer, paralyzed, up until his death. Booth's final words included, "Tell my mother I died for my country," and while looking at his hands, he said, "Useless, useless." Following his death, Booth's body was set on a ship and brought to Washington, D.C. for an autopsy. After he was identified, Booth's body was buried at the Arsenal Penitentiary, and 2 years later, was sent to a warehouse at Washington Arsenal. It wasn't until 1869, 4 years after his death, that Booth's remains were returned to his family. The Booths buried John Wilkes in their family plot at Green Mount Cemetery in Baltimore. His funeral was attended by many Southerners who still maintained hatred for Abraham Lincoln and his actions during the Civil War. John Wilkes Booth's body was dumped in a random location in Manhunt. Edwin Stanton ordered Booth's body to be thrown in a body of water. Anthony Boyle as John Wilkes Booth is caught in a lie by Confederate soldiers. Despite what history says about John Wilkes Booth's body, Apple TV+'s Manhunt portrays a very different fate for Abraham Lincoln's assassin. When Secretary of War Edwin Stanton finally sees John Wilkes Booth's body, he orders his son and the others working under him to dispose of Booth's remains in a body of water. He tells the men not to tell him where Booth's body is. And by the end of the episode, it is shown that Stanton's men do exactly that, dumping his body unceremoniously in an unknown body of water just like Stanton ordered.